Well, good evening. Thank you for coming to the Scripps Ranch Library. We are hosting a series of discussions in every community about the role of our schools in building a strong economy and making sure that our children have bright futures. When you take a look at what's going on in the school system, we're seeing that we're spending more and more money, but we are not satisfied with the results because our children are not seemingly achieving the sort of academic standards that we all hope for. And so what I want to do is come up with ideas with your help on how we can make improvements. There are some ideas that we've been kicking around and proposing on education that I think don't have a Democrat or a Republican label. They're just good ideas that we think could make a difference. But I want to hear your thoughts on issues in our local schools that we need to address. First and foremost, I have a strong belief that we need to build a network of programs, not just what happens inside the classroom, but what happens with extracurricular activities, what happens with our branch libraries, after-school programs at the Park and Rec Center. So it's something where a number of actors in the community have to work together and sponsor programs and promote programs to help our kids succeed. I want to see what we can do at the federal level to make the system work. Second, we do need to be looking at making sure that we reward our best and brightest teachers. We've got some good teachers out there, but the way the current labor contracts are written here in San Diego County and across the country is that most of the pay and benefits, the salary increases and bonuses, are given on the basis of tenure. Tenure being the only metric of how long has someone actually served. I also learned that tenure is a major driver, major criteria for where a teacher gets assigned or what school they get to be able to teach in. So you might have someone who doesn't want to work at a school that has challenges, decides to go to a school that's, quote, easier. Rather than giving the administration some sort of ability to put the teachers where they think they can get the best performance. So I'm proposing that we provide some incentives at the federal level for rewarding our best teachers. There's a program called the Teacher Incentive Fund. And in the Teacher Incentive Fund, it gives some money to school districts around the country to provide bonuses and incentives for quality teachers. There's a lot of rules and regulations the federal government tends to apply to these programs, and I want to simplify, cut the red tape and the strings, and instead focus on two criteria. Number one, that the school district would have to evaluate performance of teachers at least once a year. And number two, that any performance ratings would have to be put online for parents and the community to review. Now people might say, well, why don't you provide the measures? I don't think that the federal government should be telling local schools what they should be measuring. I think that's a discussion that happens with school boards and parents and the community to decide how they would quantify performance. But I want to make sure that it's transparent, that people know what ratings are being given. It's sort of like a Yelp system where parents can figure out, what grade or what ranking did my child's teachers get in the last 2 or 3 years. Another thing that I'd like to see us do for teacher performance is really see how we can spread best practices. The federal government obviously has the ability to look at different models around the country. We have different laboratories, and so I want to put greater emphasis on how we get programs that help mentor teachers and support teachers, because I really think that is the most important ingredient in a child's education. Finally, competition and choice. We should be promoting school reforms that allow parents the ability to select the school that their child will go to. We also need to see more competition in different educational models, and so that's why I'm a big proponent of charter schools. Now, how will this impact San Diego? Well, first and foremost, we've seen in the city of San Diego, in the 8 years prior to me becoming a city council member, they had cut library hours by 40% in some of our most needy neighborhoods. The gentleman I'm running against today voted to cut library hours by 40%, voted to eliminate after-school programs, voted to gut park and rec programs. Again, this is the city government contribution to the wellness of our children, to the development and growth of our children. I was proud of the fact that I offered budget reforms that allowed us to save money so that we could put money back into library hours, park and rec programs, to start to turn the city around so that we can be a partner again with the growth and development of children. Second, I asked San Diego Unified and Poway Unified for their performance evaluations for teachers. So that second issue of teacher quality. I found out from San Diego Unified that they do not evaluate their teachers but once every 5 years. Once every 5 years is what is stipulated in the labor contract. So I said, okay, can you give me a copy of the evaluations? I'm curious as to what you're using to measure performance and ranking. And the response came back, no such records exist. We give qualitative or verbal feedback to our teachers. I'm like, come on, you know. In every walk of life, there has to be some way of giving our employees feedback on what works, what doesn't work for them, how they're doing performance-wise. We're not doing that in San Diego Unified, our local school district, where we need it the most. And of course, San Diego Unified represents our Scripps Ranch schools here in this neighborhood. And finally, competition and choice. We have had some great success with charter schools here in San Diego. High Tech High is just one example. And in fact, San Diego was seen as a leader. But very recently, the school board changed their policy, their support for charter schools, and rejected a charter school this year. The school board actually overturned the recommendation of the administration and voted against the establishment of a charter school. The charter school had to actually go one level above and go to the state to even get clearance to establish itself. I was proud of the fact that I helped establish a charter school in partnership with the city. When we built our new library, we invited a charter school to locate on 2 floors of the library, and it takes an urban education model, looking at urban issues in terms of how it designs curriculum. Charter schools allow us to meet our children where they are and engage them in educational settings and using curriculum that is diverse, is cutting edge. Doesn't fit for all children, but having those programs and the options for parents is going to be key. On the issue of education choice and innovation, I intend to be a local voice, community leader, in working with all of you to make sure that we can iron out a more competitive, choice-based system here in San Diego Unified. With that, I want to open it up to questions and comments that you might have. We'll be releasing my education plan in 3 to 4 weeks, and we're ready to get your ideas.
Just curious, if San Diego Unified does an oral brief once every 5 years with no records, how do they ever pretend to get rid of bad teachers? They'll have no record to do it on.
You know, I've seen some statistics that show a shockingly low correction rate as it relates to teacher performance in the state of California. Some articles that I've been looking at. And when you take a look at the challenges that we have in the education system, I think that we do have to come up with a better approach to how we quantify, measure, and then recognize teachers. The current system of tenure is an inadequate measure. I don't believe that the number of years that you've worked a job necessarily is the best indicator to judge performance. And it's why we're starting with that as the centerpiece of the education reform plan that we've laid out.
So to be successful with that, we really need to work with the teacher labor union in California. So how can you convince them to do that? Because that's been one of the key points.
You're always going to have different voices at the table, and obviously the unions will be at the table. Right now, the unions are the table. They basically make the decisions. They're both sides of the equation. By putting monies on the table, federal dollars, and saying, look, we want local control. We want school boards, we want parents locally to make more of these decisions. And what we want to do with our federal dollars is make sure that we provide you resources to reward best teachers. Now, how you decide to hire teachers, how you decide to measure teachers, that's up to you. But the dollars we're going to provide through this program require that you do an annual evaluation and post that online. I think that when more parents see the grades or the ratings of their teachers, that will start a conversation in every school district around the country. If a school district says, well, we don't want that money, well, then I think that's a bigger issue. I think it's a much bigger issue if they say, well, we've decided that we think that the idea of rating our teachers is an onerous requirement or somehow not a good requirement for quality education system. How are they going to defend that? So I'm trying to be strategic with this reform because I think that the most important thing we can do is get this conversation started with parents, school boards, community members as to how would you measure performance, how would you evaluate teachers, and then of course we want our best teachers to get the available dollars, the incentive pay.
Can you convince teachers that they want that?
I talked to a lot of teachers,
That's what's gonna.
younger teachers in particular, who actually are excited by these concepts. And I think that every teacher I talk to, they're proud of the work that they're doing, and they believe that they can have an impact. And that, you know, any performance management system, if it's going to work, has to include the buy-in of the individuals themselves for it to be credible. And so obviously teachers will be part of the development of evaluations. Yes.
Who reviews the textbooks going into classrooms? Because I was talking to a couple of younger people about communism one day, and they were like clueless as to what that really meant. And it was astonishing, and these were bright young people, and I'm wondering, is that still taught? I mean, the ravages of a socialist communist country? I mean, it was astounding to me.
Well, curriculum is supposed to be set by local boards.
That explains it.
It's supposed to be set by local boards with, you know, again, elected representatives serving on the boards. You also have.
Is there any parent input or?
Again, it's basically boils down to the individuals that we elect to the school board. That's where it's all going to boil down to. And so what I'm trying to do is get the conversation started on teacher performance, because that, I believe, is the easiest entry point. Because, you know, think about it, when your kids come home and they say, first day of school, here's who I got assigned. What is the first thing you, as a parent, you think? I wonder if these teachers are good. You might pick up the phone and call some of your friends and say, hey, did Johnny have this teacher at any time? What are your thoughts about this teacher? Right now there's no system in place for that communication, that discussion, that dialogue. And I think that these reforms will help us achieve that. But my view has always been, instead of mandating educational textbooks at the national level, that ultimately it has to be done by local control, local decision making.
Which may or may not be good either.
I mean, we've got a sitting union coordinator who pretends to be on the school board.
Our school board
Yeah, Richard
member,
Brewer.
Richard
Yeah,
Brewer.
I mean, how conflicted is that? But nobody cares.
It's why, as a member of Congress, I really want to be a positive voice on education reform locally, because I think that they need to be held accountable for some of the bad decisions that they've made that have not benefited our children. And my hope is that I'll have parents that will work with me to effect change. That's the only way that we're going to be able to do this. But as a member of Congress, I will be very active in working with parents to try to hold our schools accountable for the best outcomes.
Are there
Yes.
any teachers now that would like to not pay union dues?
I'm sure there are. I talked to many of them. It's not easy to take that position in the environment. The question is about, are there some teachers that don't want to pay union dues?
So that they wouldn't have to be part of that, and maybe there'd be, in the long run, maybe more of that would happen, and then you could get the union out of it.
My hope is that we can affect more individual choice and control when it comes to whether people want to join a union. I have always said that if an individual does not want to join a union, they should not be forced to. It's an individual choice. At the same time, I absolutely support the right of individuals to enter into collective bargaining and to hire a union representative, to enter a union. That should be an individual choice. We need campaign finance reform in this country where we curb the influence of both big corporations as well as big unions playing heavy roles in campaigns. We're seeing that play out right now in this race, unfortunately, with the PAC money and the union money that's flowing into coffers of these super PACs and candidates. My hope is that what we can do is affect campaign finance reform that would require individual permission before corporations or unions can spend money on a specific candidate. And if a person does not want their money going to that candidate, they can opt out, withdraw their support, and they would receive their funds back. It's the only way that we're going to get true accountability is to respect an individual's right not to have their paycheck debited money for political causes they don't agree with.
If you were on a school board right now and you needed or wanted to get rid of a bad teacher, how would you go about it? Is there a way to do it right now, or does there have to be change put in place to just do that?
The recent decision by the California courts on tenure has been a very helpful decision in removing some of the obstacles and allowing us to start this performance-based reform. We now, I believe, have the case law in place to implement the system that I'm proposing. But what we need to do is have measurable standards, clear standards, and a direct sense of accountability. Having performance management systems in place allow you to make the decisions, if you need to remove a poor performing teacher. Like I said earlier, if you look at some of the recent articles that have been written, there's an appallingly low percentage or rate even, I don't even think they calculate percentages, it's the number of teachers that have been successfully removed for cause. And we have to have some more quantifiable system that allow people to hold every level of the organization accountable.
I guess partially, my understanding is in San Diego Unified, they just send them home. In LA, they warehouse them, they send them to a
And
bunker
still
room
collect
where they can read books and play
benefits.
cards and stuff all day. But the school system knows the bad teachers, and the way they get rid of them here is that they just send them home and pay them, not to teach. I think that's the sad state of it.
That goes all the way up to the very top.
Yes, ma'am.
The feds.
Did I hear you say something about, with this program that you're thinking about establishing, is that a teacher would be allowed to determine what school they want to work in? Is that something you said, or?
Well, right now, many of the school districts assign teachers on the basis of tenure to schools as well as classroom assignments, not based upon their certification or their interest. We saw during the whole pink slip discussion that we had in San Diego and Poway and our school districts about 3 years ago, that teachers would get pink slips and they would be bumped. So if you were a new teacher, just recently hired, you'd be the first to get the pink slip. But even within that system, there would be a bumping process where a teacher may be really good at a certain subject, like geometry. I didn't like geometry, but it was different than, as I saw, than algebra. And so they might say, well, I'm a math teacher, but I'm really good at geometry. And now they have me doing calculus, pre-calculus, algebra, whatnot. And so the teacher's interest in the course, the classroom that they want to be assigned to, would be bumped by tenure. So I heard from a lot of teachers that complained about the arbitrary nature of the system and why not assign teachers based upon what they're really good at rather than, sorry, you've been bumped because you're here for 2 years and this other individual's been here for 7 or 8 or 9 years. The tenure system is not a valid or appropriate metric for managing a system.
So you're thinking that they would have the potential to choose a school where that particular subject has a vacancy, is that what you're saying?
Or if you're performing well in the subject matter currently, that you shouldn't be bumped from that classroom setting just because someone else has more years of a good teacher. Why would we remove you from an environment where you're really succeeding? And so, again, this is, I believe, a systemic reform, a transformational reform, that if we just get one thing done in the system, this could be huge in terms of how much other change it causes in school districts around the country. Nothing's going to happen overnight. And so the way I approach things is there something we can do to change the system to drive major transformation? When we did pension reform, 2003, nobody thought we could get it done. One of the first things that we enacted was the pension vote of the people requirement. It's what I call the tourniquet. And that is, no more secret deals in the back room for you guys. Whenever you touch pension benefits, it's got to go to a public vote first. And the reason why we pushed for that is that we needed to stop these guys from increasing benefits, the politicians from increasing benefits. Then we moved forward and said, all right, we're going to require that employees pay more for their pensions. That reform was strategic because then you started getting people saying, golly, these benefits are real expensive. Well, that's what we wanted them to finally realize, is that, yeah, you guys are getting a really sweet deal. We're just now requiring that you pay for it. So then that laid the groundwork for, why don't we reform the benefits so that they're more affordable for everyone, both taxpayers and our employees, which then got us into these hybrid systems, the 401k systems, and of course the ultimate reform of capping and freezing pensionable pay and ending the pension spiking. We think through reform, we have to think through reform strategically. That's why I'm starting with teacher performance, because I believe the most important ingredient in a child's success is not even the textbook. It's whether they have a good teacher who can reach them and inspire them and find ways to motivate them. Yes, in the back, we haven't heard from you, and then I'll come back next week, I promise.
I definitely like the idea of having a metric that would, measure definitely a teacher performance, but I think it's a little bit troubling to not know, not that we need to establish what those metrics are, because I am not a teacher, but not know who's giving that grade, and it's very easy for someone to say, oh yeah, that's a stellar teacher, and the principal to say that's a stellar teacher. That principal has a number of teachers in that school. How does that person know what that person's performance is? The people that know best are the parents. Mm-hmm. So if your child is coming home and they're thriving and they're interested in learning, and they don't have to be an A student, but they're enjoying it. Somehow that feedback should be put somewhere, because like you said, you're going to call your friends. Oh hi, you tell me about so and so, and that's the report card, not what anybody can put online. Oh yeah, that teacher is stellar. So it's a little bit. It gets a little sticky with who's grading them, and they can put anything on there.
That's what I love about the system, is that parents, when they see that it's an A score, and if they all have all the experience, the same experience of, what do you mean? That teacher got an A?
Right.
How did you all come up with that? Then you start that whole conversation of a bunch of parents looking at the school board saying, you gave them what? And they're getting the bonus, not this one over here? That conversation starting in the school district can have so much profound impact on causing change to happen. That's what I'm seeking in terms of focusing on performance-based reform.
So at any rate, that change would still have to be at the school board level.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And if you find out that the best teacher, that everyone says this is such an inspirational teacher, when you start getting parents involved in defending that teacher, that causes so much change to happen. Yes.
I've worked under a number of evaluation systems, and I really think you're going to have trouble posting an individual score in an individual's name. I think there's some privacy issues, and it may be that the profile of the school will be what you'll end up with. And you're going to have some school where they give 98% of the teachers A's across the board, and that's worth a discussion as well.
Right.
I think you're more likely to get an institutional publication than you are to end up with a Sally Jones got a B- as a teacher. I think that's going to be very difficult to post on the internet.
It could be. One of I borrow from the big challenge we had here on pension reform. when I first started asking the pension system for the payouts, they said that's confidential information. So we threatened to sue under the California Public Records Act. And their lawyers said, you're not gonna win this lawsuit, so you better give up the information. We got that information from the city system. Fast forward 7 years. When we took the pension reform stuff statewide, several systems, including San Diego County, and you've noticed that San Diego County's been in the paper recently for their investment issues on the pension system. They're in the penalty box.
They're going to Las Vegas.
They denied our request. And so ultimately Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association joined in a lawsuit. The San Diego County pension system lost the lawsuit, and that information now is established as case law. You can put that information, you can demand that information be put online. And transparency sometimes is not comfortable. I understand that. But when we're talking about our children,
No, I'm just,
this,
I think it's
I
gonna be a
agree,
big
it's
hurdle.
gonna be something where people say, well, we're gonna have some pushback from the unions. But this is something that most people can recognize, because most people go to a job and there's some level of performance for them. If you're a sales agent, it's based on sales. If you're a customer service rep, there's probably some sort of evaluation or score system. Some sort of way of quantifying performance and giving it evaluation. Why is it that government seems to think that it could operate under a different approach? The future of our children is at stake. That's why I think the public will absolutely support reforms like this. They've lived it themselves, they've worked it themselves. You had a question as well.
I was just wondering, I believe it's Virginia, Maryland, and Massachusetts have had an influx of the illegal immigrant children enrolling in their schools kind of out of the blue, and nobody knew what the numbers were going to be. Is there any indication?
A couple other states as well.
Yeah, I think they're growing
about that,
because
yeah.
school's starting across the
Right.
country. Is there any indication now of what the impact would be here?
I don't know the answer to that.
I've been trying to
and,
find out, but
Yeah.
nobody wants to.
The Union Tribune typically gets answers quicker than
Yeah.
Citizens, so maybe we can encourage a member of the media to ask the
Yeah.
questions of San Diego Unified and Poway Unified, and some of our other local school districts. I'd be curious to know the answer myself.
Yeah.
I have not heard one way or
Because
another.
the government seems very anxious to pour federal dollars into that kind of, child, but not into perhaps.
I do know that there have been complaints by local government officials that they've not been, they do not feel that the federal government has been forthcoming with information or candid about the information.
Right.
In June, I gotten a number of phone calls from various local elected officials asking advice on, what do you suggest we do? And I said, call them out.
Yeah.
Call them out. If they told you one thing and now you're finding out something else, let the public know.
Yeah.
And in San Diego, I think there was enough of a uproar that certain policies were re-examined, and people recognized that we were going to watch and hold folks accountable for getting the truth. Yes?
Do you have any opinion about how the GATE program is being run in San Diego?
No, I don't know enough about it, and so I would love to get your thoughts. How do you think it's being run?
I don't know, I just heard that some children are being mixed with other children, and I thought they were
In the
supposed
gifted and talented.
Right, and I thought they
program.
were supposed to only be in classes with everybody who's in that program, so that there's not a lot of distractions, because sometimes there's a lot of distractions in the regular classrooms.
Sure. Again, when individual issues come up, on the city council, because we were dealing with the fiscal crisis, we were trying to figure out how do we triage and move things through. One of the things I had talked to Tony Young about was the potential, once we got out of the fiscal crisis and we were turning the corner, to start getting elected officials locally more engaged in the conversation about what's going on in the school system. And Bonnie Dumanis and I partnered on the Clean and Safe Schools initiative that I rolled out. And so I think that there's more of a willingness now for people not directly serving on the school board, but in an elected capacity, to say, look, I'm a community leader, I can and I should be part of the conversation. And so if there's an issue with the GATE program, if there's an issue with the school lunch program, the school lunch program is more applicable because that's, federally funded in many ways. As a member of Congress, I can convene a town hall and get the media there and get people to answer questions as to what's going on. And so part of what I'm trying to indicate with this town hall series is we're not just developing a plan, but I intend to take a very active role in the conversation about how we improve our schools. Yes, ma'am.
So the evaluation that you just mentioned, is it only applicable to San Diego Unified Schools, or is it like this
Any
for
school
Poway
district that
Unified?
receives federal funding would be part of the program. You receive $1 of federal funding through the Teacher Improvement Fund that comes with the requirement that you just do two things: evaluate at least once a year, post evaluations online, the results of the evaluations. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any feeling on voucher systems?
I'm looking for, what are the ways to expand competition and choice within the existing system in the next, 2 or 3 cycles. Charter schools, I think, are the best way to do that right now, as well as pushing school districts to allow teachers the ability to, parents the ability to select their local public school. We've had a good amount of that reform here in San Diego. I hear some good feedback from parents on that. Let's get those things in place first before we do, dramatic leap forward on other issues. Other comments or questions? Yes, ma'am.
Actually, you brought up GATE. I mean, one issue that comes up with schools is that you have almost a tiered education. If you're in the GATE program or AP classes, typically those are where the best teachers are.
Yeah.
And if you're not in that tier, you're getting a second class education, and that's not right either. So as far as teacher placement, I don't know, it's, which is sad. You're going to the same high school and you're getting a completely different level of
Right.
education based on where you are, so.
Right. And I think that, we have to, look at different ways of evaluating performance.
Mhm.
What if you have a teacher whose class averages B minuses, and another teacher whose class are getting A minuses on average,
Mhm.
using some sort of a student achievement test? What if the teacher whose class is averaging B minuses started with those children all failing and moved them to the B minus? I would argue, and I think many parents would argue,
That's a great teacher.
that's an exceptional teacher. And so what gets measured gets done, but the question is, what is the quantification of the measure?
Mhm.
What is the goal? How do you evaluate performance? Is it the delta? Is it the change of performance? Or is it the actual raw number? Raw numbers are not always the best way to evaluate.
Well, I think a lot of that's being done. Our son went to a magnet school, and he spent his first week taking subject tests to try and evaluate what level his achievement was. It was before Burson shut him down, but it was
Right.
a while ago. So the school had the data on every student as to what their benchmark was in
Starting
September.
point, yeah.
And it would not have been difficult to give the same test in June, and if you get the kids' attention, then you'd have a metric about
Yeah.
how the class went. But I think many of the schools, when they place kids in the fall, do achievement evaluations. And you just need to do it at the end of the year.
But again, it allows every school district to customize programs. It allows each school potentially to customize programs. When you take a look at what's going on in the urban charter school or high-tech high, for example, they may have a better way of evaluating performance given the programs that they're offering. My sister used to call me all the time saying, my niece, Angie, what am I going to do? She's failing all of her classes. And she would always, just lament every time the report card came out, I got the call. And I'd say, give it time. Don't worry about it. Just get her through. Got to get her to actually get the high school degree. And this is, again, in the California school system where they had cut theater, and dance, and arts. Well, what we weren't recognizing at the time is that Angie kept sitting in her room, drawing, and she'd come out. I remember, getting little art pieces that I would put on my refrigerator. Fast forward, she graduates and she says she wants to go to FITM up in LA, Fashion Institute I don't know what the T and M stands for.
Design.
Yeah, design, yeah. Actually, it's a D, design and management. So she completes a 2-year degree, and now she does graphic design on the computer, as well as she designs the display cases at the mall for a variety of the stores, and she's making good money doing it. The school system didn't really help her along because what she was gifted at inherently was the arts, and she just pursued that kind of on her own. And now she's in a career where she's actually able to earn a living. But it's an example of how do you measure that? How do you measure that art teacher and how they're able to reach a child that's not doing well with other subject matter, but is able to connect on theater or dance or art. And we talked to executives at some of these innovation companies, high tech, biotech, engineering, and they are talking about the importance of arts in the classroom or in the education system, because many of the students are not natural at math, but they're entering that thought process through the arts. And so, again, don't put every child into a box. Instead, meet them where they are and provide an environment where teachers are encouraged to go out, inspire them, and move them to that next level. You're not going to have a textbook approach to it.
I hate to ask
Yeah.
one more question.
No, please, go ahead.
There was an article in the Wall Street Journal recently by a math teacher arguing that exact position against the Common Core math, which is apparently very rigid in the thought processes they want the kids to learn.
Right.
And she was arguing that you need to allow a variety of ways to reach a solution.
Well, you also had very little public input on those Common Core standards, very little transparency as that whole process was being done. And the feedback I'm hearing from professionals is quite negative. So my hope is that we can take another look at that in the Congress, do oversight hearings, take a look at how it's being implemented, measure the effectiveness or lack thereof of the program. But my inclination is always to allow for local control on these issues. Each community is going to find perhaps a different way forward for their local economy to get the skills that their kids need.
So as it stands now,
Yes.
are all the schools in the state of California going to Common Core?
My understanding is the state of California has adopted that system, and so schools are apparently now moving in that direction.
Because it seemed like, I have a grandson, it seemed like last year, because they're all going to Common Core this fall, that things just went by the wayside.
Yeah,
He didn't really learn this year,
Yeah.
like he did the year before.
Year before.
those are the last two
Because
years.
they're all getting ready for it.
It's creating a bunch of transition.
Wasted education as far as I've heard.
Yeah, he used to know his math tables like that, and then now I ask him the same thing I asked him last year. He's forgotten it.
Yeah.
It's not being reinforced.
Last comment of the
Well,
evening,
just
yes.
for Common Core, do you know when the science and social studies standards are coming out?
I don't.
Okay, because all they have is English language arts and math right now, right? That's it.
On that, I was told by a science teacher that they escaped Common Core, that there is no science
Well,
Common Core,
I don't know if
that
it's
math
coming
is
yet.
the only sort of hard one,
Well,
everything
that's
else
why I
is.
was.
I know that there's a literature or English.
Yeah, this,
Right.
it's
as
the,
well.
Right.
it's,
The liberal arts, not the
Yes.
sciences.
Right. Again, it's now that it's being implemented, everyone recognizes that something big is changing, and it's time for us to reevaluate. Where did this come from? What was the logic behind it? How do you measure the effectiveness? But it's something I'm hearing more and more from parents, and as a federal elected official, it's something that we should be seeing Congress weigh in on in terms of oversight areas. Again, this is the start of a conversation. We're going to be having 2 more of these in the next week, several more thereafter that we're nailing down the schedule. I believe strongly that we will get better performance from government the extent to which people are involved in the process. Parents obviously are pretty involved in some neighborhoods, but in other neighborhoods they're not. Our city will be stronger if we all say that we want a system-wide or a district-wide set of reforms. And we are all involved. As a member of Congress, as a local leader, I'm not going to ignore education. I want to be part of that conversation. I want to stimulate that conversation. I want to convene those forums. Because, again, I agree with you. The school board, I think, has made we need to have some counterbalance. We need to have more involvement and a vehicle to get that involvement. Thank you very much for coming tonight, and happy to get your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.